Welcome back. Now, High Court ruling by Justice George Odunga on minimum tax legality came as a relief for majority of companies in the country who are still feeling the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. However, it now looks as if the taxman is losing key battles that will pose a challenge to revenue collection, as highlighted by Treasury CS Ukuri Atani, who told the Senate Committee on Labour and Social Welfare that the minimum tax ruling has opened a 22 billion shillings deficit in collection targets. Now, this comes on the back of another ruling that saw KRA stopped from revising prices of selected products in the country in line with the annual average inflation as mandated by law. This plus various other lobbying movements in other key sectors and industries in the country to drive down taxation have been seen by economic analysts as a huge challenge in Kenya Revenue Authority's chances at meeting tax obligations. Let's interrogate some of these adjustments and evaluate their impact on KRA's chances of collecting revenue under the following areas: ruling on minimum tax, inflation adjustment ruling, and the diesel levy and overall cost of fuel revision, and the Kenya Power Tariff Adjustment Decision, among others as well. Just before we jump into that, let's look at net revenue performance by KRA. And the biggest headline is that in 2020-2021, they actually managed to go beyond their target for the very first time in 8 years. Let's see how exactly they met it through that composition. Income tax 45%, 27% on VAT, 16% on excise duty, and also 8% on import duty. Those were the biggest chunks. But then we do expect that VAT is going to contribute heavily in 2021, 2022, and as well excise duty as well in that contribution. Good. ARNOLD, those rulings, key ones, is that the first get-go to carry missing their targets this year?
Pardon me, kindly just repeat the question.
All right, and I was asking those rulings by the High Court. We've seen that one on minimum tax, that inflation readjustment, and the other ones as well we're talking about this morning. It looks as if KRA's chances now of meeting their targets this year, the biggest one yet, are quite reduced.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think KRA have had a massive target. We're talking about 1.6 trillion.
Yes.
Target to collect. And the biggest problem KRA have encountered is the performance of the economy. Generally speaking, I think we've had this discussion before. How do you come up with taxes which do two things: enable you to collect more, at the same time enable you to collect consistently? I think what we've seen in the past 2 years is a situation whereby a lot of businesses, SMEs, manufacturing industry have struggled a lot, particularly because of high cost of business. When you have high cost of business, you find situations whereby either you cut your capital expenditure through maybe alternative sources of powering your business, or you cut your staff. Now, either of those two will affect your productivity, which will in turn affect two things: your corporate tax collectible and also your payee collectible. Now, as you mentioned, those three measures which the government has tried to do is simply a way of trying to maneuver, particularly because of outcry from the business community and also from the public, because of high cost of living and whatnot. However, as it sits, I think it's a long shot for KRA to hit their targets. I think the economy will have to recover for them to reach certain heights. They've tried as much as possible to work with financial entities to try and seal areas which had been deemed as loopholes whereby the government was losing taxes. The government has now gone ahead and worked with financial institutions as tax agents to try as much as possible to collect as much as they can. But I still feel 1.6 trillion is a long shot, particularly because of the performance of the economy. Had the economy been performing well, I think they would have hit it. But as it sits, I think it's a long shot for them.
Pretty much. Right, Abraham, litigation. I mean, we saw that from KRA last year in terms of meeting their targets. They actually tended to go the litigation way, got a lot of people to court, and they actually drove that collection target until they met it. But this year, things are working the other way around for them, especially when it comes to the litigation processes in the country. minimum tax already declared dangerous. Inflationary tax adjustments already declared null and void. Things like excise duty levy. Some of this we're talking about this morning here on diesel levy, where they've been diverting that money back to government coffers, not gonna be there anymore. Looks as if they might not meet that target this year.
Yeah, that's true. But the thing is, the question is why?
Yes.
Why is there so much litigation? And I think one of the things that drives that litigation,
yes,
is the lack of clarity in those laws. Because any law that deals with numbers of money,
yes,
should have a unique meaning. If it says 5, 5 cannot have any other meaning.
yes.
But how is it possible that laws are going to court day in, day out and getting different interpretations in different courts? So I think, and we've said it here, I think one of the things that needs to happen very quickly is we do what we did with the land laws, where we break these laws down to the individual. So we have one law for excise, we have one law for VAT, one law for income tax, and one law for any other tax that we have. That compliance is easy to understand.
Yes.
Because right now, even the most sophisticated taxpayer struggles to know whether they're compliant or they're not. And then the multiplicity of these laws, the duplicity of these laws. You're taxing the same person, and that's why you see when they go to court, they fail, because a tax has to be fair. If a tax does not meet the fairness standard, it will fail.
Yes.
Because you cannot tax me twice on the same issue. So I think we've reached a point where we've overcomplicated ourselves. So we have to untangle this and do it. Because you're right. If we go the way we are going, and now people are employing very clever lawyers, they'll get out of all these taxes. And meeting that law, meeting their target will be a problem.
Yes.
Remember, we are still recovering. So even so we're not under business as usual environment. So for me, my take would be that we are in this because of the complexity of these laws, the implementation, and how we come up, because we keep plugging them in without looking at the overall impact. So I think it's high time we went that route.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gabriel, your sentiment on that as well. I mean, you and I spoke about some other areas here that the courts now have ruled against KRA, specifically minimum tax. You said it didn't make sense. The High Court found that it didn't make sense. Good. Then inflationary adjustment, and I spoke to you and you said probably not this time round. KRA should have waited. The court called it dangerous. Now, let's talk about some levies. The petroleum, the diesel levy has been also declared null and void by the National Delegation Committee, and other areas as well we expect that are going to be declared null and void by the courts as well. Chances of KRA meeting its collection targets this year in that litigation environment?
I think as much as KRA is losing on some of those aspects,
yes.
Remember something like minimum tax, they will recoup some of what they're going to lose in that in form of corporate tax, because
yes.
it was an either-or kind of scenario. So I'm not worried very much about the minimum tax. But generally, what these court rulings tell us is that Parliament, in terms of preparing the laws, is not doing the most excellent job. Because remember, KRA's role is purely tax administration. So sometimes I get shocked when I see KRA worrying so much about laws being, or rather tax laws being called, termed as illegal or inappropriate, because it's not their job to develop this. Yes, they do make recommendations and are a key participant in that. But really, they're just tax administrators. They're supposed to be collecting, managing, and just doing the administrative role as far as taxes go. So this really goes back to, again, the lawmakers, which is Parliament. When they're passing these laws, how well thought out are they? Of course, KRA has some mandate, and Treasury has some mandate in changing some of the prevailing tax rates and regulations that have been powers passed on to them by Parliament. But you see, for example, Simba, if you're going to adjust taxes for inflation, what are you doing to the inflation rate? You're pushing it further higher up, because if the price of a commodity goes up by a certain margin and then you want to recoup your taxes, either because of currency depreciation or whatever reason, you're just adding inflation, and then we end up in an endless cycle of prices going up. So it might have been ill-informed, but there's a way to go about it. So I think they just need to think around their laws a bit more. And I think immediately any law is questioned in court, they need to start making contingency plans in terms of how to fill a gap, assuming the court rules against them, as has been the case severally in the recent times.
Pretty much. Now, Arnold, as we come to the end of this conversation this morning, the Kenyan government now wants to get into cooking gas price controls after the completion of the Kipevu oil terminal that will have a common user berth for handling the fuel. Now, according to the government, the facility that will be completed in December will have a common user berth for liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, which will make it possible for the government to come up with an open tender system, that's an OTS, for gas imports, with the regulator expected to set tariffs for handling gas at the berth. Now, the system will see the government adopt an operation model that they use for diesel, petrol, and kerosene, which will see the ministry use one bulk importer to bring in the gas on behalf of the entire industry, while enjoying huge discounts. Now, lack of common user state facility at Kipevu has locked out farms from handling cooking gas imports at the port, with only one company handling over 90% of the LPG shipments. Now, LPG prices hit a 6-year high from July after the Treasury reintroduced a 16% value-added tax on the commodity. So now the state wants to handle gas the same way it handles petrol, diesel, and kerosene. Arnold, the way to go?
I think the government has been dancing around cost of consumer goods,
Yes.
consumer goods, and I think it's okay. It could work in the long run, considering it's the same thing which is normally done with petroleum. You have one guy who's bidding under the OTS system, and then essentially distributing to the other parties. Now, currently, the government is dealing with the 16% VAT on such items, and that's why the prices have gone high. And the thinking is that if we have an OTS system, we'll be in a position to give subsidies, which will in turn give the government leeway now to put controls as far as LPG gas is concerned. So I think in the short term it could work. In the long term, we may need to look at other inherent costings as far as LPG is concerned, so that we can know how do we deal with LPG as part of the consumer household goods. So probably in the short term it will work.
Yes.
Primarily because you probably do away with the 16% VAT and move into the OTS system.
Yes. Fantastic. All right. Abraham, price controls. Why this particular product? I mean, its efficacy in the economy is neither here nor there.
Actually, gas plays a very big, because in terms of domestic, the potential for domestic use,
yes,
is huge. And especially now that we are starting to try and conserve our, because most of what we use for domestic consumption, or domestic heating and domestic cooking,
yes,
is wood fuel and charcoal.
yes,
and those are degrading to the environment. And we have already been saying, why don't we go to either liquefied petroleum or liquefied natural gas?
yes.
That is the way to go. So I think it's critical for government, and I think it's good they're taking this step, that to control that price, so that we have more people going there. Because right now what is happening, with the 16%, the price moved by that amount, probably more. And what has happened, people can afford it, they go back to their wood and everything, and then we start losing out. So it's critical. But again, we are now adopting the model of the fuel, so it will only perform as well as it has performed with the fuel model.
Interesting. Yeah. Gabriel, you hear how Abraham is ending it, that it's only going to perform as well as it has performed for fuel, but it has not performed that good for fuel. Yes, Gabriel, can you get me? Gabriel.
Sorry, Simba, could you just come again? Just come
fantastic. Again. Can get you now. Abraham is clearly on. It has performed. It's only going to perform as good as it has performed for fuel in this country, but it has not performed that good for that particular commodity.
Yeah, so correct. It's price controls really. For such a commodity, they're going to end up in the same problem they are with all other products, trying to reverse their decision, trying to see what could they have done better. It's really not going to do well because again, you see, when you control price, then you're limiting how much profit some of the distributors and sellers in the most marginalized areas can actually make. So then what happens is quality is affected. Then we'll start getting your gas canister being three-quarter filled and you're being sold to because someone is trying to make a quick buck. So just encourage a lot of fraud across the distribution and retail chain, and I think that's something that can easily be done because how many times do you weigh your gas when it's delivered? Rarely. So if you're told it's 13 kgs but it's less, you have no way of verifying. So I'll not be surprised if down the line I start receiving 12 kgs, 11 kgs, and I'll not really be able to tell. So that's where we're headed when you go out down price control.
Pretty much no better way to end it this morning. That is Gabriel clearing his sentiments there. Abraham, thank you very much for joining us, man. Arnold, thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Gabriel, thank you very much for taking your time this morning.
Okay, cheers.
And that's exactly what we have for you. Take the gentlemen back to when they came to the studio, online at Metropole TVKE, across all your social media platform. Any question for them, you do know what to do. At Kiange Simba is me on Twitter. Good morning.